Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Hayaatun Sillem and I'm the Chief Executive of the Royal Academy of Engineering. And on behalf of the Academy, I would like to welcome you all to today's critical conversation. During these conversations, we get to hear from some exceptional speakers to explore and debate issues of critical importance to the global engineering community and to society. Today's event is going to explore the dangerous and often overlooked issue of open burning of waste and discuss what can be done to reduce its global impact. This issue is currently being looked at as part of our Engineering X Safer End of Engineered Life programme. And for those of you that haven't come across it before, Engineering X is an international collaboration founded by the Academy and Lloyd's Register Foundation that brings together experts to engineer change and address shared global challenges. I'm delighted that we have two fantastic experts to guide us through this topic. We have Professor Desta Mebratu and Aditi Ramola, who I'll be introducing properly in just a moment. Now, when we think about how we can improve waste and resource management, many of us might start to think about concepts such as a circular economy and sustainable design. And these are obviously hugely important tools that are going to help us to conserve our planet's finite resources and build a more sustainable future. But the sad reality is that for tens of millions of people worldwide, these may sound like a luxury, and they are living with a more immediate issue, a lack of basic waste management provision, which forces them into dangerous alternatives such as open burning. Despite the huge costs that this practice has for human health, the issue of open burning has been pretty much neglected. And as our speakers are going to tell you today, progress has been really slow and collective action is now urgently needed. One measure of how little attention has been paid to open burning is the lack of knowledge on its impacts on climate change. According to some estimates, an equivalent of between 2% and 10% of global CO2 emissions could be attributed to open burning of waste. As we approach COP26 in November, as we reflect on the extremely troubling IPCC report, there is an urgent need to better understand the impact that open burning has on the health of our planet, as well as on people. So I'm going to be asking our speakers to set the scene for us on the topic of open burning, starting with the global perspective and then focusing on Africa more specifically. We're going to look at the current state of play. We're going to hear about any success stories or solutions that have been found or are emerging. And we're going to ask what the engineering community can do to address this key challenge, including through more effective collaboration with other professions, with policymakers, with business and civil society to bring about that much needed change. So I'm delighted that we have two fantastic speakers who are very well placed to explore these issues in detail. And first, I would like to introduce Desta Mebratu, who is an extraordinary professor at the Center for Sustainability Transition at Stellenbosch University and a visiting professor at Addis Ababa University Institute of Technology. Desta brings more than 13 years working for the United Nations Environment Programme, including serving as head of UNEP's Business and Industry Programme and Deputy Regional Director for Africa. He's recently joined the United Nations High-Level Climate Champions to raise the topic of open and uncontrolled waste burning on the global climate mitigation and resilience agenda, which of course is so crucial in the run-up to COP26 and then COP27. And that's also supported by our Engineering X Safer End of Engineered Life programme. Joining Desta, we have Aditi Ramola, who is the Technical Director of the International Solid Waste Association, where she manages international projects and partnerships with the UN and develops innovative projects globally to tackle the waste management crisis and raise the contribution of waste managers on the Sustainable Development Goals agenda. Aditi has previous experience in the private sector and the United Nations Industrial Development Organization's Climate Policy and Networks Unit. Aditi also contributed to our global review on Safer End of Engineered Life, which formed the evidence base for Engineering X's work on open burning, and Aditi sits on the programme's technical advisory group. So we've got two excellent experts alongside us to help us navigate this important topic. And I'm going to kick off with a few questions for Aditi and Desta, but we're then going to move into audience Q&A. So please do start popping your questions into the chat box at any time, and we'll try and get to them as many as possible before the end of the session. So let me turn to you first, Aditi, please. Can you start off by just telling us why open burning is so common across the global south? Why do people burn waste? Thank you, Aditi.
Thank you very much, Hayaatun, for your kind introduction and also the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here to talk about this critical issue and to shed some light on it. So just a very simple answer to this complex question would be, well, people are burning waste because they feel that they have no other choice in terms of disposal, in terms of getting rid of their waste. It can also be due to lack of collection systems or the lack of sound disposal systems. The outdoor burning of household waste or yard waste, we call this practice open burning, is happening all the time across the world as a method of volume and mass reduction, particularly in areas without good waste collection services. So when waste accumulates or piles up in the areas, it can cause bad odors as well as attract animals and rodents, which could feed, breed, and transmit diseases, causing pathogens, which is another reason why people openly burn their waste, as it destroys pathogens and that would otherwise, give people diseases or give risk to people living and working around them. So in a very strange way, the open burning of waste, which is harmful for humans as well as the environment, offers in some sense a benefit to the people who are disadvantaged or have absolutely no access or other means of disposing of their waste. So this is, I would say, in one way, why people are burning their waste. I just want to show you some photos that I've taken in the recent past weeks, since I've been obsessed with this topic. This is the photo that you actually see now is taken in India in outskirts of a town called Puducherry. And what you see there is an overflowing bin. Waste is strewn all over. Clearly, this place where I've taken the photograph lacks waste collection. Or if there is waste collection, it's not frequent enough. So people, what do? And you will see in the next slide. Well, magic. All the waste has disappeared. And how did that happen? Well, they burnt their waste. As you can see, there's evidence of burning that you can see. There's some black char on the photograph, and now a cow has come over there just to see if it can find some more food there. And so what you see in several places, these piles of smoldering waste. So it's a widely practiced common problem on the outskirts of big cities and towns, where areas are producing almost the same amount of waste as in the city, but collection systems don't reach those places. And so far I've talked about burning of waste that's taking place or is being carried out by people and the public who are getting rid of their residual waste. But through the research and work carried out for Engineering X, the global review on safer end of engineered life, through dialogues and discussions during the workshops that we had at the beginning of this year, what we've seen is that there is evidence that open burning is also sometimes carried out by municipal authorities across the globe. And this is as a form of treatment and perhaps to reduce waste volumes. So that's another reason. And at other times, people are burning their waste to get to materials that are valuable, and burning makes them more accessible. For instance, burning cables and wires to get to copper or to other e-waste, to get to other metals and materials and substances. And finally, for people or organizations that don't actually have access or options to dispose of their hazardous waste or healthcare waste, waste is usually burned as it neutralizes and gets rid of pathogens before it infects people further. So for instance, burning or partial controlled burning of waste is quite accepted when you have a disaster, when you have actually emergencies, you have displacement camps, refugee camps, and so on. And so these are just some of the reasons why people are openly burning waste, but we need more research and data to actually understand the deeper issues and motivations surrounding this practice. And so I would leave it here, and back to you, Hayaatun.
Thank you. Well, I think that last point is definitely one we'll need to return to. But that's very helpful for just giving more context. And could you build on that a bit more? So particularly for those of us who are less familiar with the challenges associated with open waste burning, can you give us a bit of an overview of the global perspective on open burning, how prevalent it is, what the key challenges are that it causes, and the impacts that we've alluded to? But could you put a bit more colour in that for us, please, Aditi?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, as I said, the practice of open burning is taking place daily, sometimes several times a day in many, many places around the world. And this is happening mostly where there is severe lack of waste collection and waste management infrastructure. And this was one of the key findings of the global review, which warned that open burning of solid waste is actually happening very frequently and is damaging the health of tens of millions of people worldwide. And some studies and estimates actually suggest that up to maybe 40% of global waste is being openly burnt. We don't know that number clearly because there is a clear lack of data about this practice, since waste burning, as you saw in the photographs, is a highly localized practice, and it depends on the waste management services that are kind of available in that area. So this means that the true scale of the problem is still unknown, and more research is urgently needed to understand the true impact of the problem. So the uncontrolled outdoor burning of waste is characteristically a form of low temperature combustion. And so what happens with that is high contaminant emissions come out of that, and that contributes significantly to air pollution, which affects health, and it also has environmental impacts. So it results in the emissions of a wide range of potentially hazardous substances and produces smoke that contains air pollutants. So just to give you some examples of pollutants that are released, basically they include carcinogenic substances such as dioxins, furans. You have particulate matter, carbon monoxide, the SOxes, which is basically sulfur oxide, the NOxes, nitrogen oxides, benzene, and so on. If you look at the practice of burning e-waste, as I was mentioning before, for instance, they contain hazardous materials such as lead and arsenic, and these, as you know, are highly toxic to humans and to the health. So these substances might be directly inhaled by people who are living around sites where open burning is happening, or these are distributed through the environment and subsequently ingested. They're taken up by the crops, or they're absorbed through our skin. And so exposure to these pollutants can basically worsen lung conditions or heart conditions, and can have other harmful effects, also including premature death. And basically, the risks are worst for communities that are living close by, and also to vulnerable segments of society. For instance, pregnant women, elderly, the children, people with comorbidities, and so on. So here I've referred to a little bit to the health impacts of open burning, and then there are the environmental impacts or climate impacts, as you mentioned as well. For instance, through the release of what we know as black carbon. It's a short-lived climate pollutant, so it lives in the atmosphere for very short periods of time, but it actually has a global warming potential of up to 5,000 times more than CO2, carbon dioxide. Some really good work has been carried out on this topic, on this particular topic of black carbon emissions by researchers at Imperial College. And so if anyone is interested, you can actually go online and find that study. So though this practice of open burning is quite prevalent throughout several low and middle income countries, and also in some high income countries, it depends on what's being burnt. Most of the data and evidence is based on assumptions and surveys with minimal robust data, and there's hardly, good data there. So for instance, we don't know yet, the definite amounts of waste that's being burnt, what's the mass, even being burnt on open dump sites, or even in small piles in front of people's homes or commercial establishments, so on. So many of the existing studies are currently referring to anecdotal data. So it's a complex issue. There are reasons and motivations that we really need to find, and we need a multidisciplinary approach to actually understand and develop strategies to address the issue. Well, compared to marine litter or these things that are in your mind right now, which has the world's attention, waste burning is not, as you mentioned, is not a global issue, and it needs a coordinated effort. So it's not received so much attention within the SDGs, which are the Sustainable Development Goals. And so a good starting point actually would be to start with local risks and then develop local strategies and take it national. I would stop there and give you back the floor, Hayaatun.
Gosh, Aditi, thank you. Well, notwithstanding the lack of evidence and data and research on this issue, you've painted a very, unfortunately, clear and sobering picture for us at what's happening at a sort of global overview level. I'd like to turn to Desta now and ask you to give us some more detail on what's happening in the context of sub-Saharan Africa. What do you see there, and what are the key challenges?
Thank you very much, Hayaatun, and it's great to be part of this critical conversation. And I would like to thank the Royal Academy for facilitating it. Before going into the specifics of the West and the open burning challenge, I would like to link with what Aditi has described from the global perspective by highlighting some of the mega trends that may determine where we would go in the coming decades, both in the African context and the global context. One of these mega trends is the population growth. Currently, we are 1.4, estimated to be 1.4 billion, and it is projected to reach 2.5 billion by 2050. This is for Africa population. Urbanization. Africa is one of the fastest urbanizing continent. From about 46% of urban population, it is estimated to reach 56% by 2050. Industrialization is pushing unsustainable consumption and production pattern with change of lifestyles, which is changing the volume and complexity of the West African countries are dealing with. Most importantly, the infrastructural gap that exists in Africa across all sectors. By the estimate of the African Development Bank, most of the sub-Saharan African countries are lacking 65 to 70% of the infrastructure they need in order to have a sustainable development in the continent. So these mega trends are going to change the nature of West we will be dealing with in the coming decades. And look at where we are right now. We have a number of waste streams that are already becoming critical problem for African countries. The first one is the agricultural biomass waste, which has been there for centuries perhaps, and which is very much widespread. And it is happening across Africa in relation to different types of agricultural biomass waste. The second component is, the second stream is the domestic waste stream, which is becoming more and more complex, both by volume and characteristics in terms of its pollutants content and so on. Industrial waste is also causing major problem, particularly in terms of its hazardous content. And when it comes to open burning, there are some industrial waste streams that has high percentage of volatile organic compounds, which is a triggering factor for open burning wherever it happens. Of course, more recently, we are dealing with the electronic waste, which is growing by volume and which is causing various challenge for African countries. You have also the healthcare waste, which is being burned at different locations with unregulated and inefficient kind of incinerators, and which is also contributing to the problem of open burning. So we have all these streams of waste coming out in the absence of, virtually complete absence of, a properly designed and managed sanitary landfill for most of the sub-Saharan African countries. So this is the situation we have in our hand. Unfortunately, the problem has not been recognized as it should be because of the low level of institutional and public awareness. This is related to what Aditi said earlier, due to the lack of properly organized information and data on what kind of waste are we dealing with, what are the major problems they are causing, and so on. We have a weak regulatory and enforcement regimes that is, providing an open space for whatever is being done. Dumping at any location happens across Africa in different places. There are worse images that you could see in Africa when it comes to open dumping, including open burning of waste at dumping sites. And this absence of sanitary landfill or specialized waste management infrastructure is aggravating the problem that we have in the region. And of course, another factor which is very much linked to that is the low level of engineering and technological capacity, particularly when it comes to waste management in most sub-Saharan African countries. So we have all this challenge that are aggravating the problem. Of course, open burning contributes to climate change in different ways, but it is much more beyond that for African countries because of the proximity of communities with the environment, including sanitary landfills. Sanitary landfill or these open dumping sites in a number of African cities are source of livelihood for many local communities, in fact, which are scavenging around the dumping site for valuable resources to meet their daily needs. But it's not only a negative side. What is encouraging in the African context is, although we are lacking the proper institutional and infrastructural arrangement for efficient waste management in the sub-Saharan African context, the informal culture of recycling that is existing across the countries, that is being promoted by various communities, youth groups, and so on, is helping in dealing with the waste management problem in Africa. So you have this positive side, which is being seen across the continent in different forms and ways, which will take out some of the valuable resources and convert them into useful products. And in most cases, these valuable products, valuable materials or waste materials are also source of the pollutants that Aditi was referring to once they are exposed to open burning, such as plastics mix in open dump site burning, which leads to a number of pollutants being discharged. So essentially, the challenge we are facing in the African context, beyond being a climate change issue, it is also a critical social issue in terms of healthcare, the healthcare challenge it is causing. Respiratory tract diseases are growing in leaps and bounds in African urban centers. Cancer rate is increasing in African urban centers across the sub-Saharan African countries. So there is a potential of direct correlation between what we are seeing in our health challenge and what is happening in the way we are managing our waste. So this is a very critical issue, even here and now, but also related to climate change. Over to you.
Thank you. Gosh, so we've got the technical, the social, the economic, the health, and the climate dimensions. Let's just talk for a moment more about the climate dimension, because you have recently joined the United Nations High-Level Climate Champions team to focus on this topic of open burning and to raise awareness of its role in climate change. So can you tell us a bit more about that new role and what you're hoping to achieve through it, please, Desta?
Well, as you rightly pointed out, the challenge we are facing requires policy, technological, infrastructural, operational interventions at various levels. That can only happen when people have sufficient knowledge and information about what we are facing in relation to open burning of waste and how we can deal with it. So what we'll be trying to do, the UN high-level champion has a number of team-specific initiatives that is mainly geared towards initiating action-oriented interventions. The climate change movement is does not have a shortage of commitments. What we are lacking is action on the ground. So this, the open burning of Waste initiative under the UN high-level champions will be focusing on initiating or triggering, catalyzing the highly required actions that need to be taken at various levels. And that would start by establishing the knowledge base. Where are we? What are we dealing with? What can we do? What means do we have available, both in terms of knowledge, technology, community engagement, policy actions, and so on. So consolidating this knowledge in a structured way and presenting it to the various stakeholders, including the policymakers, the private sector actors, civil society, academic institutions, what will be their role, what kind of action they need to take. So in the coming 12 to 14 months leading to COP27, we'll be focusing on consolidating the knowledge and information, and based on that, identifying some of the key actions that could be considered at various levels, engaging with the relevant stakeholders, and possibly come up with some kind of action agenda for Africa to deal with this open burning of waste in the African context. And this will have all dimensions, as you rightly pointed out. It has the economic dimension, the social dimension, the environmental dimension, and the political dimension. And we have a lot of work to do. And I would like to invite all participants of this conversation to be part of this activity, express their interest, and so that we can engage with them and try to come up with some actionable, concrete agenda for Africa in terms of dealing with the open burning of waste. Over to you.
Thank you, Desta. Gosh, well, I think that's a great call to action, and we'll be building on it over the next half hour. I've got some fantastic questions coming in, and I want to get to as many as possible. But I'm going to start off with a question for you both, and I think I'll ask Desta to kick off, and Aditi, please do join in if you have comments to add. We've seen a lot of coverage in recent years. So I'm sitting here in London, and in the UK, we've seen a lot of reporting about how countries like the UK and other developed nations are effectively accused of exporting their waste to low and middle income countries, where it then may be burnt or mismanaged in some way. Can you comment on this and to maybe give some thoughts on how significant you think this is and what your message to the governments of these countries might be? And I'll start with you, Desta, please.
Well, this has been a challenge for a number of African countries for decades. And in my 32 years of experience working across Africa, and particularly with the United Nations Environment Programme, we have assisted a number of African countries to put the necessary mechanisms in place in order to deal with this challenge. But still, the nature of the challenge is changing its shape. Previously, it used to be low-value waste that are moving around across the region, and some of the hazardous waste that have restrictions of disposal in a number of European countries being shipped out of Africa. I think on this regard, most African countries have put in place the controlling mechanisms. But with the electronic waste, this is a big challenge for most African countries. And the spread and penetration of electronic equipments in Africa is also increasing, but also whatever comes from other countries, whether it is European or Asian, is contributing to the growth of the volume and the complexity of the electronic waste challenge. It's not only that, we have also a challenge of shipping out obsolete technologies to Africa. And this is happening right now in African context. I can give you an example where an incinerator or an incinerator technology that was used for waste to energy conversion in the European context has been shipped to Africa recently using a public investment, a public investment, not donors' money. And this is basically, we are seeing these white elephants moving around the region. And this is something which developed countries need to work on seriously. And Africa needs to be supported in terms of benefiting from all the knowledge and technologies that have wider benefits, both in terms of resource efficiency, climate resilience, low carbon development. There are so many technologies from which Africa could benefit, but we don't need the white elephants to be shipped to Africa. So when we talk about waste, there is a broader context of going beyond the normal conventional waste that we are dealing with. Obsolete technologies are a significant part of the threat to Africa. Over to you.
Thank you, Desta. Well, I hope we can talk a bit more about technologies. I'm very keen to get some more questions in from our audience. So Aditi, feel free to build on Desta's comments, but I would also like to give you first chance to respond to Delilah Khalid's question. And she's asked, could you comment on gendered roles in open burning? So differences in the involvement and impact on women compared with men. So Aditi, if you have any thoughts on that and want to build on Desta's comments, please go ahead now.
Thank you very much. That's a great question. Just building very briefly on what Professor Desta said, because the transboundary shipment of waste, it's actually looked at. I mean, within the UN system, there's actually a methodology or a way to deal with it. But obviously, people find ways out of it, and you see these so-called white elephants being shipped from high-income countries or high-income settings to places where they might not actually fit. And so this is a challenge that we, not just Africa, but also in other parts of the world, we face. And what we would like to say to the people and to the governments that are part of this trade is that we have to look at the whole problem in a globalized setting. And just because it's out of sight and out of mind doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt you in some other ways. So we're interconnected society. So if waste is being mistreated and if it's being burnt somewhere, it's actually also hurting the rest of the world. So that's just a very short comment. And regarding the gendered roles, yes, through our research we did see when it comes to, say, informal waste pickers and so on, there is when it comes to certain kinds of treatment and certain kinds of recovery of materials on dump sites and so on, there is a bigger percentage of women that work there, and because of that, there are the children that follow them. If small children, then the women actually bring them to work as well. So there's a much greater impact of bad gases and bad, basically all the impacts of open burning, all the hazardous impacts of open burning disproportionately on women as well. So we did, through our analysis, we actually did look at the gendered impacts, and we do see that there is sometimes a disproportionate, depending on the activity, of course, disproportionate impact on women.
Thank you, Aditi. And Desta, again, feel free to comment on the last question, but I'm going to throw in one more. So there's sort of cluster of questions from Vito de Barros, Andrew Jenkins, and Abhishek Tiwari. And they're really asking about the economic dimension of this. So how one can monetize the collection of waste to some sort of central location where it can be better processed. So there's one question looks at, is an opportunity to subsidize that to reduce the cost to the individuals. Another is asking, how do you give the waste value to make it worthwhile for people in low-income countries to collect the waste? And there's also just a question building on that around whether there's any study, any research on low and middle income country experiences around this monetization of waste. So I'm going to ask you, Desta, to pick that up, please.
Thank you very much. To start with the gender role, in fact, besides what Aditi has just said, I would consider women, and women particularly are playing more positive role in managing waste in Africa, particularly in terms of waste to resource conversion. You will find a number of cases where local communities, organized women groups are engaged in making values out of what was considered to be waste and thrown away. Just to give you one example, there is a company called Soul Rebel here in Ethiopia, which started about 20 years back by making sandal shoes, slippers, using rubber, waste rubber, and garments, organized by women. The entrepreneur is a woman, and she was employing women. Today, Soul Rebel is a global company which has shops in Hollywood, in Los Angeles, a major company with its own brand. But it started by recycling waste, making values out of waste. So you find this kind of difference. So women are positively playing a meaningful role in terms of waste to resource conversion. Regarding the question, the economic dimension, which is a very critical issue, whenever we talk about waste to resource conversion, it is very much related to the economic dimension of waste. We can always generate valuable products from what is considered to be waste, with a very limited exceptions. Most of the waste in Africa, when you look at the waste profile in Africa, 65 to 70% of the domestic waste collected is largely earth material and biodegradable material. Most of them are transporting what can be managed at the local level in terms of producing compost from biodegradable material and so on, and focusing on more valuable products, recycling and so on. So in the African context today, when you go around Africa, there are informal recycling groups, organized use groups collecting, for example, PET bottles collected and taken back into the production system. You see around Africa, PET bottles being used for vertical urban farming by having them connected through a string, which would also be used for drip irrigation. So there are a number of innovations happening within the region. And strengthening this economic dimension through various measures, technical collaboration, financial support, funding mechanisms, and so on, will take us very far, both in terms of addressing the environmental, social, economic dimension of waste in a more holistic way. So we need to work on contextualizing the economic dimension of waste management in the African context and try to make more values from whatever we are generating as waste. Over to you.
Thank you, Desta. Those are really helpful, concrete examples. And as you say, contextualized to the local situation. Now, I'm going to slightly shift onto another topic that's coming up in the questions. So James Harris is drilling into this issue of, so much we don't yet understand and know. And he's asked, are we able to quantify landfill stress? He's asked in Africa, but I think one might just say in low middle income countries more broadly, particularly in the context of rapid urbanization. And then a slightly different but related angle from Susan Gouvenek. She has said, could satellite data coupled with machine learning identification algorithms be used to help us better understand the extent of open burning globally? So Aditi, I'll go to you first, but I'll come to you afterwards, Desta, as well, please. Aditi.
Extremely good questions. Yeah, absolutely. Studies are being done right now using GIS and satellite data to actually map out illegal dump sites and also even instances of open burning that's happening. Of course, it's not, these studies are in their nascent phases, but absolutely this is the way forward, I suppose. As we were giving examples, these open burning things, if they don't take place in big dump sites, they're actually taking place in localities in front of people's houses, commercial spaces, and it's very hard to track. You can do an extrapolation or you can do some statistical analysis, but it's very hard to track. So GIS is actually absolutely going to help get that database together that we lack right now. Hayaatun, what was the first question?
Well, why don't we take that to Desta, because originally the question was asked in the context of Africa, and that was looking at what data we have on quantification of landfill stress in Africa.
Yeah, thank you very much. There isn't much data as such at the continental level, but there are some data for some of the countries in relation to projects aimed at developing an integrated solid waste management for a specific city and so on. I know there are some data for Nairobi, Kenya, for Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, Maseru, Lesotho, Accra, Ghana, and so on. So these are isolated data, but much needs to be done in order to have a complete picture at the continental level. Some attempt has been made by the Global Waste Management Outlook of 2016, which was, there was a regional report of that component prepared by the United Nations Environmental Programme, which tried to look at the existing state of landfills and waste disposal sites in the African context. But there is still much work that needs to be done. Regarding the second question, as Aditi rightly pointed out, most of the open burning in the sub-Saharan African context is happening in a very dispersed area coverage, and they are more of point sources rather than consolidated sources, and they may not be amenable for the kind of GIS and higher level technologies. But a simple social survey can tell you a lot in the African context. So there are some places where that could be a useful approach to use, but before that, we can do a lot in terms of assessing where we are using a simple socioeconomic survey and urban survey that we can do in the local context. Over to you.
Thank you, Desta and Aditi. Great, very helpful answers. I've got a slightly different question. We've been talking quite a bit about the social, the economic, and the health drivers that lead to open burning of waste. Sean Young has talked about, I think in this context, the Caribbean, seeing open burning of waste as a form of protest, I assume sort of a political protest. So they're asking whether this is something that you see more broadly and whether you have any recommendations on how it can be dealt with. Aditi, would you like to start with that, or would you rather go to Desta?
I can begin. I mean, at least in my knowledge and the research that I've done, I haven't seen that example before, but it's a very valid question regarding, I mean, the prevalence of open burning as a sign of protest. I mean, what we've seen is that it's generally practiced when there are lack of infrastructure, waste management infrastructure. And when the question of economics came up as well, people don't see the value of waste when it's mixed. And so if you can deal with some fractions at the source itself, as Professor Desta was saying, that a lot of the waste that we see in low and middle income countries happens to be organic or biological in nature. And if you just have simple solutions to get that waste stream out, then you have to deal with a lot less. Of course, during times of global unrest, of course, people burn waste or burn tires and such things as sign of protest. But when you talk about, municipal solid waste, or if you talk about just healthcare or, some sorts of hazardous waste, these are being burned because people don't have any other choices. But that's my short answer, and I pass it on to Professor Desta.
Thank you very much, Aditi. This is a very interesting point. And in fact, one of the challenges that African urban centers are facing in relation to the urbanization trend I mentioned earlier is that most of the African urban centers are dealing with a population of 4 or 5 million with a waste management or collection infrastructure of 200, 300,000. So when the waste management infrastructure fails, communities in every neighborhood start burning it. Whenever the collection system doesn't work, the next option they have is to burn. And in fact, the worst thing is in some places, they even dump it into existing sewage line. So the sewage line will be blocked and the infrastructure will go into a mess. This is the kind of challenge we are facing even in African urban centers. So in a way, it is right that urban communities and people are taking it as a way of expressing their protest against the failure of a municipality system or a municipality service in connection with waste management, collection and disposal. Over to you.
Thank you, Desta. I'm trying to fit in as many questions as possible, so we're getting into the quickfire section. A question from Simon Diffie, who is saying that his experience of working in the Pacific Islands leads him to wonder where you're in small island states or archipelagos and things, where you have very little free land. What is the alternative solution to open burning of waste? Because clearly dumping waste in the oceans is utterly unacceptable. So what is the technical solution available to you there? And I think, Aditi, would you like to answer that?
Absolutely, I can go first. Yeah, that's again, small island states and archipelagos have actually a very unique set of challenges that they face, and of course, land being one. Again, I think I'll go back to what we said earlier, is to try and make sure that your waste streams are kind of differentiated, so you don't mix the wet with the dry. As soon as that first step is taken, there's a lot more things that you have a lot more possibilities open up to you. So if you have unsoiled, say plastic waste, or you have unsoiled paper waste, there's so many different avenues of recovery, of recycling that open up for you. Of course, the challenge is that you're on a small island. You might not have the economies of scale. You might not have the industry. And so then the whole logistics comes into place. Like if you have a bigger island, suppose, where more recycling is taking place. But my first thing is absolutely don't mix the waste streams, because that's what reduces the price value or the value of the waste that we talk about. And absolutely no dumping into the ocean. Open burning is also out of the question. So when you talk about residual waste, so the waste that you actually can't get anything else out of, the ones that in European countries that go to incinerators or go into, say, sanitary landfills, you cite a sort of a sanitary landfill within that little archipelago or little island, or as I said, if you have a bigger island close by, you put it all together and then ship it there. But no burning, no dumping, and absolutely also keep the waste streams separate. That's kind of what I would say.
Thank you, Aditi, and that answers, I think, Hannah Lemmer's question, who was querying whether the impact of waste sorting was actually beneficial, made things less likely to result in open burning. So I think you've given us a resounding yes then. Desta, feel free to come back on that last comment, but I think we're coming towards the last section. So I would like to throw in another question that I will then take back to Aditi as well. And that's really thinking a bit more about the products, the way the products are designed and manufactured, so that we consider the end of life consequences. And so Patrick Mahon questioned whether the consumer packaging was part of the problem, and should we be looking at policy levers in the countries where those products are being consumed that shift us away from disposable packaging towards more sustainable alternatives. And Margaret Ross was asking about manufacturers being encouraged to design for ease of disassembly, so that we effectively think of end of life at the point we design the product and manufacture it. And so I really welcome your thoughts on that. Desta first, please.
Thank you very much. Let me start with the point about the small island states. It is a big challenge for them, but the solution, as Aditi indicated, is to work for an integrated solid waste management system, which starts with separation of waste and the collection, and then the other steps will follow. And integrated solid waste management system is I think, an efficient approach to utilize for every country, but particularly for small island states. And I think in the African context, Mauritius has done a very effective job in terms of managing its waste in a more sustainable way. And that could be a good lesson for others also. The other question, which was related to packaging, of course, that is one of the major contributor for the volume of waste and the complexity of waste we are dealing with. And by the way, this has been recognized by African countries. For your information, Rwanda, it has been almost now 8 or 9 years since Rwanda banned completely any plastic material from coming into the country. So no packaging used by plastic. And a number of African countries have already banned these thin film packaging materials. There are still some shopping bags with certain milligram weight, thickness, and so on, but thin film packaging materials are banned by a number of African countries. So actions have started to be taken along that line, and looking for alternative packaging options is one area where significant work could be done. The design factor in product design, which I have worked for many years on, is a key factor, particularly when it comes to these high level pollutants, hazardous materials, including electronic waste. And the design for disassembly is one of the dominant approach in electronic industries. And if we are able to utilize that approach in terms of taking back those valuable and at the same time most hazardous materials from the electronic waste, taking back into the system, will assist a lot in a number of ways in dealing with this problem in developing countries' context. So the product design approach is central to the problem of dealing with our waste management problem. Over to you.
Thank you, Desta. So Aditi, I'm going to hear your thoughts on that last question around the design, manufacturing, and kind of whole approach to packaging and so forth. And then I'm just giving you warning that I'm going to have you both give me a final message that you want our audience to walk away with from today. You've done a great job of advocating for a stronger focus on this issue. So I want you to make sure you can land one last key message with your audience. But Aditi, first of all, do you want to just pick up this question around design and manufacturing?
Absolutely, and I think that would also kind of get my the last message or the key take-home message that I want people to leave with. I would just like to refer to what is called the waste hierarchy. And if you look at it, prevention is right at the top. When we talk about waste and resource management, we're actually looking at end of pipe. We're looking at solutions to deal with waste when it's waste. Whereas when you talked about disassembly, you talked about design, you talked about looking at manufacturers, you're actually taking into account prevention in some ways, because when you start having the design thinking, when you have the product thinking, then you are designing already for end of life, already for the end of use. And it's absolutely necessary going forward, because we are coming to kind of an end of our resources on our planet Earth. We don't have a planet B. And what my take-home message from today's discussions, which have been really fruitful, would be, of course, to always be aware of that aspect as well. Prevention is always better than actually going for the cure. So that's what I would like to end with, and I'd hand over back to you, Hayaatun. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditi. That's fantastic. A really clear message for us. And Desta, what is the last takeaway that you would like to leave with our audience as they go back into their lives? What's the thing you want to stick in their minds?
Thank you very much, Hayaatun. I just want to emphasize that, yes, open burning of waste is a challenge, but it is also an opportunity. There is a lot of opportunity to be obtained by dealing with it in a more holistic and effective manner. And I believe that the engineering community has a significant role to play by working with other disciplines in this area, because it requires a combination of intervention, the policy, the legal, the technological, operational management, sociological, everything. So we engineers, since this is an engineering community initiated forum, I would like to call upon all engineers listening to this discussion to be actively involved, to focus on the opportunities. We have the challenge, we have to deal with the challenge, but there are also various opportunities which we can capitalize on, and we should be able to work on that collectively. And I thank you, Royal Academy, for facilitating this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Desta. Lovely, empowering note to end on. I mean, it's an almost overwhelming challenge. You've done an amazing job of helping to characterize it. You've brought your expertise and your knowledge of the subject to enable all of us to learn more about it. And I think that's incredibly important if we're going to be able to galvanize global action on this topic. More of us need to be aware of the scale of the problem and understand it. But you've also clearly signposted some of the constructive and practical things that we can do to respond to it. And that's just as important. I'd also like to thank our fantastic audience for giving us so many great questions. We could have gone on for another hour. So thank you, audience, and thank you so much, Aditi and Desta, for your great input. And if the dialogue has sparked your interest in what the Academy and Engineering X are doing on this issue, please do go and have a look at our website, where you can find more on our Safer End of Engineered Life programme. And also particularly building out from the last questions around the role of design and manufacture, you may well be interested in joining us for our next critical conversation, which takes place in October. We'll be joined by Professor Mark Miodownik, discussing right to repair and the circular economy. So I hope that we'll see some of you again there. But for now, thank you so much and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.